sermon. So one day there was this nun who worked for a local home health care agency, and she was out making her rounds, and she ran out of gas. And thankfully, she was close to a gas station, so she walked down to the gas station to see if she could borrow a gas can to carry some gas back to the car and put it in and drive to the gas station and refill her tank. Well, unfortunately, the attendant there said, the only gas can we have just got loaned out to somebody else, but if you wait a few minutes, I'm sure they'll be back with it. Well, she was in a hurry. She said, I can't wait. So she went back to her car. She rummaging around the car looking for something she could put gas in, and she found a bedpan. She was taking a bedpan to one of the patients. So back to the gas station she goes. She fills the bedpan with gas. She walks back to her car, and she's filling her tank with the bedpan. And two guys drive by in a car, and one of them says to the other, now that's what I call faith. They didn't think it was gas in that bedpan, right? Oh, man. Let me ask you this question. What kinds of things might your faith cause you to do? Over the years, I've used the story of the great tightrope walker Blondin as an excellent example of saving faith. Blondin lived in the 1800s, 1824 through 1897, first doing his tightrope walking over there in England. But the thing that brought him to fame and to riches was when he decided to tightrope walk across Niagara Falls. And so it was there on June 30th, 1859, that he made his first walk over the falls. And his crossing utilized a 1,100-foot-long rope that was 3 inches in diameter. It took him 20 minutes to get across, carrying one of those poles that weighed about 30 or 40 pounds. It was 30 feet long. But during that summer of 1859, he made 9 crossings. And the most difficult of those crossings was when he carried his manager on his back. 6 times during that crossing, the manager had to get off his back and let Blondin regain his strength, and he'd climb back on and continue on. Perhaps the most famous story, though, is the story of the wheelbarrow. So on one of those crossings, he went across pushing an empty wheelbarrow. And when he went across, he said to the crowds, I did it with an empty wheelbarrow. Who thinks I can do it with a person sitting in the wheelbarrow? Of course, the crowd went crazy with enthusiasm. You can do it. Well, one of the guys most enthusiastic in the crowd, Blondin, said, why don't you be the one I carry across? Needless to say, the man escaped pretty quickly through the crowd, right? He wasn't going to be pressed into that. But this episode demonstrates there's often a great difference between the faith that we say we have and the faith that we really have. And so the real measure of our faith is not our talk, it's our walk, right? And so saying we have faith in God is one thing, but really putting our trust in God is something else. Now, incidentally, in case you were wondering, Blondin died at the age of 73 in England of natural causes. How about that? Even in that dangerous business, that's not what took him out. So as we continue here in chapter 2 of this letter of James, we see that James is expanding on his theme that we need to be doers of the word and not just hearers of the word. And now James switches his attention away from playing favorites, like we talked about last week, to a faith that saves. 3 times in this section, verse 17, verse 20, and then in verse 26, he declares that faith without works is dead. 3 times he says it. He's telling us that faith without deeds is an empty faith rather than a saving faith. So let's work our way through the passage, see how James develops the difference between what saving faith is and what saving faith is not. So let's start, first of all, with what saving faith is not. And James is going to touch on three things that saving faith is not. And the first is saving faith is not just something we say. Look at verse 14. And what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but does not have works? Can such faith save him? Now notice, James doesn't say that the person has faith, but he says the person claims to have faith, right? The person talks about having faith. The person might know all the right phrases. And, there are a lot of people in our country that say they have faith, but they really don't have many deeds. In 1991, James Patterson and Peter Kim took on the task of surveying America. And they published their results in the book called The Day America Told the Truth. Maybe you remember when that came out. But in the chapter dealing with America's religious beliefs, they stated that 90% of the people questioned said they truly believed in God. 1991, 90% of Americans truly believed in God. And yet they also discovered that those who said they believed in God, 50%, half, had not been to church in the last 3 months. And 30%, a third of them, hadn't been to a church service in over a year. Pollster George Barna claims that in his surveys, 4 out of 5 Americans say that they believe in God, that they are Christians. And yet, when you look at the other statistics of American life, you see their Christianity doesn't seem to be making much of a difference, right? When you look at the rates of adultery or drug use or pornography or crime, how is it that 4 out of 5 Americans are Christians? Jesus warned us, saying, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, right? Not everyone who talks about faith will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. So, not everybody with a Christian bumper sticker is truly a Christian having saving faith, right? Talk's cheap. Saving faith is not just something we say. Number 2, saving faith is not just something we feel. Now, emotions are important. We just did a whole sermon series not long ago on emotions. So, emotions are important. And emotions involved in religion are important. But they can become too important. We can be emotionally moved in worship. We can be emotional about our interaction with others. But if we never act concretely or positively on those emotions, then what good are they? We can go to church and get goosebumps. Or as some people call it, the quiver in the liver. You ever had the quiver in the liver? I'm not sure I've ever had that one. But anyhow, but it never make any difference. It might not result in the kind of faith actions that it should cause. So James illustrates it with another one of his hypothetical case studies. You remember last week the hypothetical case study was 2 visitors came to church, and one was rich and one was poor. And how are you going to treat those people? In this hypothetical case, he said, if a brother or a sister is without clothes and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, stay warm, be well fed, but you don't give them what the body needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith, if it does not have works, is dead by itself. And one of those good old classic Charlie Brown cartoons, Peanuts, Charlie Brown and Linus are outside and they're all bundled up in their warm winter clothes, and they notice, oh, Snoopy, he's over there shivering, he's all cold. And so Linus says, we better go over and comfort him. And so they go over, and Linus and Charlie Brown say, be of good cheer, Snoopy. Yes, Be of good cheer. And then they walk away, and Snoopy's got like, what? What was that? How'd that help me? And so, where in the world did Charles Schulz get that idea for that cartoon, right? Right here in the good book, right? So saving faith is more than just feeling something, feeling sympathy, feeling empathy. How much does it help to say to someone, hey man, I really feel for you? But we do nothing to really help them with their situation. Saving faith is not just something we feel. So number 3 then, saving faith is not just something we think. For some people, faith is just an intellectual thing, right? An intellectual trip or an intellectual experience, something to be studied, something to be discussed, something to be debated. But notice what James says here in verses 18 and 19. But someone will say, and again he's proposing this someone, right? Someone will say, you have faith, I have works. Show me your faith without works, and I will show you my faith, or show you faith by my works. You believe that God is one. You got faith. Good. Even the demons believe. And they shudder. So James imagines this intellectual objector, right? This intellectual guy says, hey, I have faith. You got deeds. That's cool. You got your thing. I got my thing. We're both okay, right? And James says, wait a minute. Saving faith is more than just something you think. It needs to be demonstrated. It needs to be practiced. It's got to be in action. Or there's a question of whether it's real. So he brings up the demons. James says that faith, that is only intellectual or emotional, is like the faith of the demons. Oh, they believe in God. And it causes them to shudder. That's about all it does, right? And so there are a lot of people who have strong beliefs in God in the Bible. They can recite their creeds, their catechisms, they can talk about doctrine. But what they think or believe isn't impacting their lives. It's not changing them. It's not making them holy. It's not making them more like God. Kind of like the woman in John chapter 4. You remember that Samaritan woman? Jesus came to her and had a conversation with her, and they began to discuss spiritual things. And she was well versed in the spiritual controversies of her day. But she wasn't allowing any spiritual things to affect her life. She was living an immoral life. And so the devil and his cohort of demons, they are not atheists. Think about that for a minute. The devil and the demons are not atheists. They know there's a God. And they shudder about it. They believe in God in an intellectual sense, and they're great theologians, and they even know the Bible, and they try to use it against us, right? James says demons believe and shudder, and the Greek word there is to bristle. Kind of like when the hair on the back of your neck stands up when you get scared, right? To shudder is what happens when you read one of those Stephen King type novels, or kids read the Goosebumps or whatever those novels are. Or you're sitting around the campfire and you tell some scary stories like our friend Kathy Page used to do out at Camp Hunt and scare us all when we were going to go back to our cabins at night. But here's a humorous thought. What's a scary story for demons? Think about that for a minute. Picture the demons sitting around the campfire telling a scary story. Maybe they tell the story about when Jesus cast out those demons into the pigs. And those pigs ran down the hill and drowned themselves. That's a scary story if you're a demon, right? And a pig, both, right? Saving faith is more than just having an intellectual belief. It's not just something we think. So in summary, James is saying saving faith is not just something we say, not just something we feel, not just something that we think. So what is saving faith? Number 2, saving faith is something we do. It's action. And so going back to verse 18, James said, show me your faith without works. How are you going to do that? I will show you faith by my works. Somebody said that faith is like calories. You can't see them, but you can see their effect, right? Or other people said faith is like electricity. Again, not something you can see, but if you take hold of a 220 line, there's going to be an effect. It's going to produce some action, right? And so how in the world can somebody who's truly connected with someone as powerful as God not going to have that affect them, cause action, and a change of their life? Saving faith leads to action. Look again at verse 17. In the same way, faith, if it does not have works, is dead by itself. And add verse 26 to that. For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead. A word translated dead is a Greek word for nekron, which refers to being dead, like that body that no longer has the life in it, the corpse. It is nekron. It is dead. And that's what faith is like without works. So we've all been to funerals, and we've all seen the corpse laying there in the coffin. And sometimes, the funeral director is really good, and the person looks pretty lifelike, right? They've done a good job. That corpse really, boy, doesn't Aunt Sally look good, right? Or, they've got them all the best they can, but there's something so unnatural about the body without the spirit. And that's what faith is like. Faith without works is like that body without the spirit. It's just a shell. It's empty. It's useless. And unfortunately, some people who have dead faith try to dress it up like the corpse and make it look like it's alive. And so they might go to church once in a while, make it look like their faith's alive, or maybe they've got that Bible on the coffee table that never gets used, but it looks good there. Maybe they even carry it in their car, kind of a good luck charm. And if you ask them about their faith, they don't refer to their living faith, their saving faith. My family, we've been members of the church. Back to my great. Well, so what? What about you? What about your faith? Or maybe they pull out their baptism. Well, I got my baptism. Like it's that get-out-of-jail-free card of Monopoly, right? They carry that like that's the thing that's going to get them out of trouble at the end. But saving faith is more than just what we say or feel or think. It's something we do. And as James drives home this point, he brings up two examples from the Old Testament of God's people. He points to Abraham and he points to Rahab. Could there be any two people more different than the two of them? Think about it, right? Abraham's a man, Rahab's a woman. Abraham's Jewish, Rahab's a Gentile. Abraham's a major character, Rahab's a minor character. Abraham's a patriarch, and it appears that Rahab was a prostitute. So in this tremendous contrast, James is saying that it doesn't matter who you are, as long as you have one important thing, a faith that leads to action. So I don't have time to go into great detail, but let's review their stories individually just for a minute. So let's talk about Abraham for just a minute. Some 40 years before God gave Abraham the ultimate test, Abraham had been called to follow God. He was given the promise, right? The promise that through him and his descendants, all nations would be blessed. That his descendants would be like the stars of the sky and the sand of the seashore. And Abraham believed God. The Bible says, and it was accredited to him as righteousness. And I love that other line there that says, and he was a friend of God. Wouldn't you like God saying that about you? And about your relationship and faith with God? Oh, David or Ed or Karen, they're my friend. Good stuff. So anyhow, everything was going okay, but the problem was there was no child to start this long descendant line, right? And they waited and they waited and they waited. And of course, they tried something that they shouldn't have tried, and they ended up with Ishmael. But eventually, 25 years after that first promise, Isaac finally comes, the child of promise. Everything's going well, right? Everything cruises along, but about 15 years after Isaac was born, that's when God said, got another assignment for you. Take your son, your only son, Isaac, and take him to the mountain I'll show you, and sacrifice him there before me. You talk about a confusing command. Isn't this the child of promise? Isn't he the one all those descendants are going to come through? But Abraham trusted God. The very next morning, he got up and went, right? And they went to that mountain, and they climbed that mountain, and he built the altar, and he put the wood on the altar, and then somehow he put his son on the altar. And you know the story. It wasn't until he raised that knife to actually go through it. I'm sure he was thinking along the way, maybe if I just go this far, God will stop me, But God didn't stop him until it was obvious he was following through with it. And that's when the angel of the Lord said, do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. I now know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Genesis 22:12. Abraham's faith was demonstrated by his action. His works proved that he did indeed trust God. The other example is that of Rahab, right? This supposed prostitute from Jericho. Now, she didn't have a long history with God's people, nor of a life of faith, if that indeed was what she did for a living. But when those two spies sent by Joshua came to her house in the wall of Jericho, somehow the Holy Spirit, somehow God worked to say, take care of these men and trust in me. These men are different from the other men who come for your other services. They need your help. And so she acted on what tiny bit of faith she had. She hid the spies, and then she helped them to escape by lowering them out the window, telling them to go back by a different route. Through her actions, the lives of those spies and her own life and the life of her family were eventually saved. Her willingness to defy her own king, putting herself at personal risk, singles her out as a person who didn't merely talk about faith, but was willing to act on it. Now, we don't know much about her life after that point. We assume she went along with the people of God as they conquered the rest of the promised land. But her name's listed in the Matthew chapter 1 genealogy of Jesus. How about that? So what's the point? Well, in a real sense, God is saying to us, talk is cheap, right? Put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. If you believe in God and in God's Son, then prove it. And you prove it by your actions, your deeds, your life. Actions always speak louder than words, and our behavior shows what we really believe. Now, we need to make a very, very important clarification here. It'd be very easy for us to read this passage in James and conclude that we must work our way to heaven, that our works are the thing that saves us, and we must never, ever come to that conclusion. When James says in these verses what he says, it seems like they're a direct contradiction from what the Apostle Paul wrote in numerous places in his letters. Like when Paul wrote in Romans 3:28, "For we maintain that a man is justified by faith apart from observing the law." Wait a minute. Isn't James saying that we're saved, a faith that doesn't have works is dead? And here's Paul saying, no, we're justified by faith apart from works of the law. What's going on here? Well, we need to understand that there is no contradiction at all between what Paul and James say. They're both carried along by the Holy Spirit. They're both preaching the same gospel. The difference is that they're fighting two different enemies. Paul was fighting legalism. James was fighting laxity. All right? Paul was focused on an argument about the way of salvation, that we are saved by faith. We're not saved by our works. James is focused on the evidence of salvation, that faith is proved by works. So see how that's a big difference between the two? So both believed wholeheartedly that we are saved by God's grace through faith and not by works, so that no one can boast. Ephesians 2, verses 8 and 9. Of course, you know the next verse, Paul went on to say, but we're God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works that God has prepared in advance for us to do. But we don't do those good works to earn our salvation. We do those good works as evidence of our salvation, evidence of our faith. So imagine Paul and James kind of like two good guys in those old westerns. Maybe they're both sheriffs, and they're going up against two different enemies, and they're standing back to back in the middle of the street at high noon, but they're shooting in two different directions. They're aiming at two different problems spiritually that needed to be addressed. One was legalism, trusting in works of the law, and the other was laxity. Oh, I don't have to do anything. I just have to say I have faith, and that's all that I need. So both have in mind saving faith, a faith that's active, a faith that's alive. So all we need to do as we conclude here is ask ourselves the question, are we demonstrating our faith? Is our faith really just about saying and thinking and feeling, or is our faith all about doing? So what is my faith prompting me to do as I worship God, not just on Sundays, but every day? What's my faith prompting me to do in my service to God? What is faith prompting me to do about my fellowship with God's people? What is my faith prompting me to do about sharing that faith with those who may not know Christ and the gospel? What is my faith prompting me to do about financial giving to the Lord? What's my faith prompting me to do about holiness and about character, about living a life of love? May God help all of us have a saving faith, a dynamic faith, an active faith, a faith that works, a faith that